The neon glare of a highway billboard cut through the damp chill of a Seattle underpass, illuminating a chaotic sprawl of nylon tents and discarded blue tarps. Among them stood a meticulously organized campsite, its perimeter swept clean and its gear stacked with military precision. This was the makeshift home of former Army Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole. A decade ago, Cole was navigating armored vehicles through the volatile streets of Kandahar. Today, he was navigating the labyrinth of the streets, one of the thousands of American veterans experiencing homelessness. Cole didn't look like the stereotypical image of a broken man. He still woke up at 0500, kept his worn combat boots polished with whatever oil he could find, and carried his life in a tactical rucksack. But inside his mind, the war had never stopped. The sudden backfire of a city bus wasn't just noise. It was a complex psychological trigger that sent his heart rate spiking and flooded his system with adrenaline. The invisible wounds, often grouped under the broad umbrella of post-deployment stress, had slowly alienated him from his family, drained his savings, and ultimately left him outside the safety net of the society he had sworn to protect. The tragedy wasn't just Cole's isolation, it was the institutional failure behind it. Every Tuesday, Cole walked 2 miles to the local Veterans Affairs (VA) clinic, only to find himself trapped in a staggering maze of modern bureaucracy. He was met with endless waiting lists, lost paperwork, and systemic backlogs that offered clinical solutions to a crisis that required immediate human intervention. For many veterans, the transition from the highly structured world of the military to the stark individualism of civilian life felt like jumping out of an aircraft without a parachute. Yet, as the rain began to fall over the underpass, the story shifted from a narrative of despair to one of tactical resistance. A beat-up pickup truck pulled up to the curb, its bumper adorned with unit patches from the 101st Airborne. Out stepped a group of veterans wearing high-visibility vests, carrying hot meals, clean dry socks, and tactical medical kits. They weren't government bureaucrats. They were part of a rapidly growing, veteran-led grassroots movement determined to leave no man behind on the home front. The battle to rescue Ethan Cole from the shadows of the city was about to begin. The driver of the pickup truck was Sarah Jenkins, a former Marine logistics officer who had traded her uniform for the rugged routine of street-level outreach. She founded a nonprofit veteran initiative after watching too many of her own comrades slip through the cracks of the system. For Sarah, this wasn't charity, it was a tactical recovery mission. She approached Cole's tent not with a clipboard of government forms, but with the unique, blunt familiarity shared only by those who had deployed. Instead of asking Cole to recount his trauma or fill out a psychological evaluation on the spot, Sarah offered a hot meal and talked about the weather, the old bases, and the shared frustrations of civilian life. This wasn't an accident. Veteran-led organizations had discovered that traditional clinical environments, white walls, fluorescent lights, and sterile interviews often mirrored the interrogation rooms or hostile settings that triggered a combat veteran's hypervigilance. The Grassroots strategy shifted the focus entirely, building trust through shared history before trying to tackle the heavy weight of psychological recovery. As the night wore on, Sarah introduced Cole to an alternative path that bypassed the endless waiting lists of the regional VA hospital. She explained how local veterans were building their own ecosystems of resilience, transforming agriculture, coffee roasting, and woodworking into unconventional forms of therapy. They discovered that the best antidote to the loss of purpose following military discharge wasn't just medication, but action. By giving a veteran a new mission, a team, and a tangible project, they could systematically ground a mind that was still stuck in a combat zone. Cole listened, his eyes reflecting the glow of the distant city skyline, feeling the first spark of hope he had experienced in years. But the transition wouldn't be as simple as shifting locations. The next morning, as Sarah prepared to transition Cole into a veteran-owned transitional housing facility, they were forced to confront the harsh legal and bureaucratic roadblocks of a city administration that viewed the growing veteran encampment not as a crisis of human service, but as a public nuisance that needed to be swept away. The sound of heavy diesel engines woke the encampment at dawn. City sanitation trucks, flanked by local police units, arrived to execute a mandatory cleanup sweep of the underpass. To the city administrators, it was a routine zoning enforcement. To Ethan Cole, the flashing blue lights and the mechanical roar of the garbage compactors felt like a dawn raid on a forward operating base. The perimeter he had carefully maintained to keep his anxiety at bay was instantly dismantled by municipal workers throwing personal belongings, including old military gear, into the backs of trucks. Sarah Jenkins arrived just as the tension reached a boiling point. Cole stood rigid, his hands clenched, caught in a terrifying psychological crossover between the cold reality of a Seattle morning and a defensive combat posture. One wrong move, one aggressive step toward an officer, and a highly decorated veteran would end up in a jail cell instead of a recovery program, a tragic pipeline that thousands of justice-involved veterans had traveled before him. Sarah stepped directly between Cole and the enforcement teams, using her calm, authoritative command presence to de-escalate the situation and shield him from the chaos. With Cole's temporary sanctuary destroyed, Sarah bypassed the standard bureaucratic intake channels entirely and drove him straight to the Forge, a veteran-owned and operated agricultural co-op located just outside the city limits. Founded by a group of combat engineers, the Forge was designed specifically for veterans who rejected the sterile walls of traditional clinics. Here, the treatment wasn't sitting on a couch talking about the past. It was hard, physical labor, working the soil, and operating machinery within a structured team environment that perfectly mirrored the camaraderie of a military unit. The transition was immediate and jarring. Cole was handed a shovel and assigned to a team tasked with building a new hydroponic greenhouse. For the first time in years, he wasn't viewed as a statistics anomaly, a charity case, or a public nuisance. He was an asset. Surrounded by men and women who spoke his language, understood his silence, and respected his service, Cole began the grueling process of redirecting his hypervigilance into tangible production. The middle of the battle wasn't about erasing the memories of Kandahar, but about learning how to march forward with them alongside a new squad. 3 months at the Forge had completely redefined the trajectory of Ethan Cole's post-military life. The hypervigilance that had once paralyzed him under the highway underpass was now being channeled into precision mechanics and team management. He had stepped up to lead the co-op's new automated irrigation project, utilizing the same technical focus that once kept tactical vehicles running in the desert. His combat boots were still polished, but now they were caked in fertile soil rather than city grime. The turning point came when the Forge hosted its seasonal community market, a massive public event designed to bridge the widening gap between the military community and the civilian population. For Cole, the prospect of facing crowds was the ultimate psychological test. In the past, crowded, noisy environments meant danger. Unpredictable variables that his mind interpreted as an imminent threat. But this time, he wasn't alone in the crowd. He stood behind a table stacked with organic produce and veteran-crafted goods, flanked by Sarah Jenkins and his new team. As civilian families walked through the market, thanking the veterans with the customary, well-meaning phrases, Cole realized something profound. The traditional civilian expression, "Thank you for your service," though deeply respected, often felt like a polite barrier, a phrase that acknowledged the uniform but ignored the complex reality of the person inside it. True support wasn't found in a slogan, it was found in creating spaces where a returning warrior could transition from being a defender to a builder. The success of the market proved that the alternative, veteran-led ecosystem wasn't just a temporary shelter. It was a scalable, highly effective model for national recovery. By combining peer-led support networks with purposeful, community-driven enterprise, they had bypassed the slow, rigid structures of corporate-style government medicine. Cole looked out over the crowded market, his heart rate steady, his posture relaxed. The phantom echoes of Kandahar hadn't completely vanished, but they had finally lost their power to dictate his future. He had successfully completed the hardest march of his life. The journey all the way back home. The story of Ethan Cole did not end with a miraculous cure, because the invisible wounds of war do not simply disappear. Instead, it ended with a victory of integration. 1 year after leaving the Seattle underpass, Cole stood as the operations manager of a new transitional housing build, directing a crew of recently discharged service members. He had become a vital link in the very chain that had pulled him from the shadows, transforming his personal survival into a blueprint for others. The conclusion to Cole's journey is the definitive verdict on America's veteran crisis. The true tragedy of the post-deployment experience is not the presence of trauma, but the systemic loss of purpose that follows the uniform. When the public looks at the heartbreaking statistics of veteran housing insecurity and operational stress, the default assumption is often that these individuals are irreparably broken. But the success of veteran-led, grassroots initiatives proves the exact opposite. These men and women are not deficit assets. They are highly disciplined, resilient, and capable leaders who have been cast adrift in a civilian society that lacks structure and shared sacrifice. By shifting the focus away from a purely clinical, over-medicated approach and redirecting it toward purposeful action, peer camaraderie, and community building, these alternative ecosystems achieve what corporate bureaucracy cannot. As the United States continues to grapple with the long-term societal costs of its foreign campaigns, the solution lies not in manufacturing empty slogans or expanding endless institutional waiting lists. It lies in recognizing that the best people to heal wounded warriors are the warriors themselves. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole found his way home not because the ghosts of the past stopped screaming, but because he found a new squad, a new mission, and a new reason to build. The battlefield changes, but the creed remains absolute. You never leave a brother or sister behind.